Sometimes you just gotta believe.
Hi, welcome to Storytime with Carrot. I'm Carrot. Today, we'll be experiencing the final chapter of a story called A Wasted Future, written and narrated by me. If you haven't seen the previous chapters, I recommend checking them out first. Otherwise, this one might not make much sense. I'll leave links in the description. Now, let's see how this story ends. I'd been at the sewer outpost for a week. In that time, I'd learned as much as I possibly could about the plans the winged elite had concocted to finally dispose of the king of bandits. I'd also learned that there was only one way I was going to be of any use, but as I stood atop the tallest building in the city, I wasn't sure I was ready to do what I was about to do. The weight of the wings on my back was a physical representation of the weight of the legacy I was fighting for. The peace of an entire world depended on my ability to drop from this rooftop and not end up splattered on the cracked pavement below. I drew in a breath slowly. This was something I'd always dreamed of doing, and I knew Jarek would catch me if anything went awry, so mustering every bit of confidence I had, I leaned forward and stepped off into empty air. My stomach shot into my throat, my heart thundered wildly in my chest as I plummeted toward the pavement below, my life flashing before my eyes. Then a snap and a tug across my chest before all my insides felt as though I had left them behind. The wings caught the breeze, and I shot forward with such force I nearly gagged on the air. Jarek shot past me, and I triggered another rocket. Jarek circled around me, pointing to a spot on the ground far below us, and dove headfirst before pulling up in a short circle and landing with hardly a bump. I made wide circles over the area, attempting to slow my descent, but 5 meters above the ground, I heard a tick, and the tension across my chest released. I fell out of the sky, hitting the ground with a jarring thud, followed by some very unqueenly words. Jarek laughed until I glared at him, and then said, "You did pretty good for a noob." "I nearly broke my neck," I said, my butt cheek still hurting from landing on a rock. "Let me show you something." And so for the next few hours, Jarek taught me everything he knew about flying, landing, launching, and gliding. By the time we coasted back into the city, I was as good as I could get without practice. Over the next few days, I practiced flying every chance I could get. When I wasn't flying, we were holed up in Jarek's office, making plans to sneak into the Nether. Jarek wanted me to stay behind, but after a lot of arguing and point proving, I managed to convince him that I was the only person who could sneak into the Nether. It was the middle of the week when Susie, a young girl with big eyes, tapped on my chamber door and led me into the sewer before sunrise. By dinner time, I returned as a whole new person. "That Susie's mom sure can do some kind of magic," Jarek said, as he took in my disguise. I grinned. "As long as I don't have to talk to anyone, I should be fine," I said, my not very masculine voice in stark contrast to the way I looked. When night had fallen, I made my way out of the sewer outpost. I had gotten fairly confident with my wings, and I launched myself skyward toward another portal on top of a mountain. Ever since the portals had reopened, people had been building shielded rooms around them to hopefully prevent an invasion by nether creatures. Unfortunately, these rooms weren't very good at keeping humans contained, so the bandits still had full access in and out. Jarek had told me that this particular portal was never used by the bandits because of location, so getting through was easy. He wasn't wrong, and I stepped from the portal onto a basalt outcropping. Smoke and ash filled the air. The netherscape spread out below me, an endless dimension of heat and fire. I picked my way across the scorching landscape, over rickety bridges, and past strange, pig-like people who seemed to be unsure of whether or not I was a threat. I only had a vague idea of where I was heading, and I didn't know how long it would take to get there. I was glad I'd been able to leave Hope with Jarek. This was no place for a dog. After several unbearably hot hours of trekking through warped and twisted netherscapes, I finally laid eyes on what I was looking for. The Bandit King's castle, as dark and corrupt as the king himself. I had a plan that would get me in, and once I found out where the general was, I was supposed to return to the overworld and help Jarek plan his rescue. I hadn't fully agreed to that plan, though, and if I got the chance to rescue the general myself, I wouldn't hesitate to do so. I found a place to stash my wings in the canopy of a warped tree and began picking my way down the hillside to the slatted bridge that would lead me over a boiling sea of lava and into the hands of the Bandit King. Guards hovered near the door, but after looking at me and seeing a burly bearded man clearly in the mood for a little bloodshed, they assumed I was one of them, and no one looked twice as I walked right into the castle. The castle was built for defensive purposes and nothing more. The entry was small and plain. Narrow stairs led up on one side and down on the other. I didn't want to hang out longer than necessary, so assuming the general was being held in the dungeons, I opted for down. After a reasonably long descent, I found myself before a door that couldn't be anything other than an entrance to a dungeon. I pushed the door open as if I owned the place and stopped dead in my tracks. My stomach revolted and bile rose to the back of my throat. This was indeed a dungeon. The smell was atrocious, a combination of urine and vomit, and death and fear and pain. It took every ounce of will I had to stop myself from adding the paltry contents of my stomach to the filthy floor. Before me was a narrow hall, and to my right a door. I could see cells lining the hall, and hoping the general was in one, I checked them all. Some of the cells held prisoners who were starving and had clearly been tortured. Others held the remains of what had once been prisoners who were starved and tortured. None of them were the general. I was afraid of what I'd find behind the door, but I knew then that I didn't have a choice but to go into that room with the bloody handprints on the floor just outside it. Handprints of someone who had been trying to escape before being dragged back through. I swallowed the lump in my throat and pushed my way into a scene out of a nightmare. A torture room, just as I'd known it would be. All manner of bodily fluids stained the floor, and puddles of thickening sludge oozed into drains in various locations. On one wall, a pig person was chained by his neck to the ceiling, chunks of his largest muscle groups missing as though they had been carved from a Christmas ham. Dead men were splayed out on tables at the back of the room. Bones lay in piles in the corners as though these monsters couldn't even be bothered to toss the bodies into the lava that surrounded the castle. And there, in the center of the room, suspended by his ankles over a roiling pit of lava, was General Whitethorn. I rushed to him, only to be stopped by a magical barrier. I bounced back in momentary shock. The general writhed, clearly screaming, but I couldn't hear a sound. The barrier was impenetrable, soundproof. This was a trap. Just as that realization dawned on me, the chain fell away and General Whitethorn plummeted headfirst into the lava, disappearing below the surface without a sound. I didn't have time to react before I was knocked out and dragged unceremoniously into a stinking cell. I woke up into darkness with a splitting headache. I didn't have to reach up and touch it to know I had a massive knot on the back of my head, but I did anyway. I didn't know whether or not they knew who I was yet. I wasn't sure if the glamour still held, and I had no way of finding out until someone came to get me. Part of me hoped it would be a long time before that happened. Unfortunately, my luck had run out the moment I'd been foolish enough to fall for the trap, and some time later, though not late enough for my liking, a scarred and brutal face appeared at the door to my cell. "Who are you?" a harsh, gravelly voice demanded. I winced visibly, my thundering head not keen on the sound of his too loud voice. "I said, who are you?" he boomed, his voice reverberating through my cell as if it were a chamber 1,000 times bigger than it really was. At least he didn't know who I was. With as much bravado as I could muster, I attempted to deepen my voice as I said boldly, "Who do you think I am?" The King of Bandits' face fell momentarily, and then abruptly shifted into a massive grin as he bellowed out a laugh that resounded through the dungeon and rattled my aching brain. "You look like a man, but you sound like a boy," he roared, laughing even harder. "Your misfortune is very humorous to me," he said, clearly trying to regain his composure. I glared at him from where I stood. He was an ass. I couldn't wait till I got the chance to chop his head off. "Now," he started again, having regained his angry visage, "who are you?" "If everything goes to plan, I'm your worst nightmare," I said in return. "Have it your way, then," he said, and walked away as though he truly didn't care. I listened to the clunk of the outer door as it closed and considered the reality that my attitude might one day get me killed. Time passed. It could have been days or weeks. I don't know. Time doesn't work the same in the Nether, but I found myself standing in a large room before the King of Bandits himself. "You've fared well in my dungeons these past few cycles," he said. "Most men crumble at the screams of the tortured. Most men fear their next. Why are you so different?" he asked. I momentarily contemplated telling him I wasn't a man, but that seemed like a dangerous game to play, so I opted for flattery instead. "I wanted to join you. You're the greatest bandit ever, so I came here to learn from you. Your men attacked me and threw me in a cell." "Ha! I don't believe it. Why were you prowling about my dungeon if you came to join us?" he said. I just wanted to see what you could do. That's all, I swear it, I groveled, forcing an expression of fear and awe across my face. I've always had to fight because of my voice. I was hoping you could use my skills and teach me more. What of your threat when I spoke with you before? Wouldn't you be a little upset if someone smashed you over the head and threw you in a dungeon full of piss and vomit? I've had time to calm down now, and I get it. I do. I deserved it. I should have come right to you, I said, and then, with a taste of self-hatred coating my tongue, added, Your Majesty. After a bit more back and forth, I managed to convince him I was just an idiot would-be bandit who'd made a bad choice. I was given a room at the top of the castle, and after being warned that I was being watched, I was left on my own. I had no idea what I was doing, but I knew for sure that I would not return to the overworld until the King of Bandits was dead. It was some time later, many cycles having turned, that I found myself once again standing before the King of Bandits. Rage oozed from my pores as I struggled to control myself while trying to come up with a way to refuse the task he set before me. I wouldn't survive a battle with all these men, but there was no way I was going to do what he was asking of me. There was no way I was going to kill anyone to prove my allegiance to him, and certainly not the leader of the Winged Elite. Suddenly, a strange look flashed across the Bandit King's face, and as I looked at my hands, I noticed that they seemed to flicker. The glamour was failing. I needed to get out, and fast. I don't feel well, I said, trying to think of anything that made me want to vomit, hoping it would help sell it. I think I'm going to hurl. I gripped my stomach and moved toward the door as though I was afraid I'd puke right then. Stop! The king roared. Sweat dripped between my shoulder blades, not the sticky humidity sweat of the nether, but real stinking fear sweat. My hands flickered again. The king circled around me slowly. Who are you really? He said. And why shouldn't I slit your throat where you stand? I glared at him. I was fully armed. We were alone. There was a chance I could take him. My hands flickered again. Once. Twice. Then the glamour sputtered, as if running out of gas, and failed completely. You! He bellowed, stepping back and drawing his sword. I'll have your head for the death of my brother. I dodged his swing, returning one of my own, missing by a hair. He killed my family, I growled back. Rage engulfed my senses. I felt wholly alone in the world, my father and brothers murdered in our home. No one left to care about my grandmother's legacy, except an uncle who wasn't even a blood relation. For a brief moment, rage gave way to sorrow, but then, as if some angel whispered in my ear, I remembered what I'd left behind in the overworld. My dreams for a better future. My best friend. My dog. And suddenly, as though filled with the power of the gods, I let loose a roar that set the entire castle shaking. I leapt forward and laid into the King of Bandits' sword first. He hardly had a hope. Within moments, I stood over his lifeless body, panting. Without a king, this kingdom would fall. After escaping the nether and returning to the overworld, Jarek and Hope and I set out on foot for my uncle's village. There was simply no way for a dog to fly. Walking would take a couple of weeks, but the trip would be peaceful with the Bandit King gone. I was sure the future would hold many more perilous adventures, but I was happy to enjoy a little downtime with my two very best friends. Oh man, you ever get sad when you finish reading a really good story? I know I do. That was great though, and so much fun to write and make. If you liked it, be sure to give that like button a little tap, and if you don't want to miss out on the next story, I suggest making sure you're subscribed. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Love ya. Bye!
Sometimes you just gotta believe.